Hi you guys, and welcome back to another one of my videos. If you're new here, my name is Holly and thank you so much for watching. I have a few things I want to quickly say before I get into this video. Firstly, I've gotten myself a mic. Actually, my boyfriend bought me a mic, so thank you Liam if you're watching. And I feel like the audio is a lot better already. So yeah, I really hope you guys can tell the difference because I know in my past few videos the audio hasn't been great. Secondly, I just wanted to say thank you so much. Those birds are so loud. I'm really sorry guys, but I wanted to say thank you so much for over 1,000 subscribers now. I can't believe I got there. I'm so grateful. I appreciate every single one of you so much, so just thank you. Also, I just wanted to let you guys know that this video is going to be a two-parter. This video has a lot of information that I felt like was really important to include, and because of that, yeah, I've decided to do it in two parts. So I'm going to upload the first one today and I will upload the second part tomorrow because I don't want to keep you guys waiting for a week or anything like that. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Today I wanted to cover the case of Raymond Keith Kehlet and Jennie Kehlet. This case actually remains unsolved, and because of that I feel like it's really important for me to take a moment here and let you guys know that I've linked Crime Stoppers below. So if you have any relevant information you feel like could help in this case, please let them know. And secondly, I'm going to link the email address of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, which I would encourage you guys to email in regards to this case. You would be surprised how much influence us as the public can have on getting a case to proceed to criminal court. And so I know that I will be sending them an email in regards to this case, and I really hope that you guys take 5 minutes out of your day to do that as well. Ray was born in either 1966 or 1967 in Western Australia. His father was in the farming business, meaning Ray, his parents and his two younger brothers Mal and Dave all moved around a bit within Western Australia, but they did stay in more of like the rural Western Australia. The boys got along growing up as much as brothers do. I have 3 brothers, so I can definitely imagine there would have been times when they argued and fought, but are you really a family if you're not like that? Ray absolutely loved the outback and the bush. It's what he grew up surrounded by, so when he was old enough to move out of home, it didn't come as a surprise to anyone when he chose to stay in rural Western Australia. When he was still quite young, he ended up marrying a lady who's called Liz, and they together had 3 kids, but for whatever reason their marriage didn't last, and so they ended up splitting up. In the early 2000s, Ray then met a lady who was called Jennie. Jennie had also been married previously to a man that she had 3 kids with, and I guess the two of them just hit it off because by October of 2007 the couple actually got married. The couple moved around Outback Western Australia a bit. They lived in a little town called York and another called Lesmurdy. I'm probably butchering that name, I'm really sorry guys. Before buying a farm together in a small town called Beverley, which is about an hour and 40 minutes east of Perth, which is Western Australia's capital city. In 2009, Ray and Jennie actually together adopted a Great Dane who they called Ella. They adopted her through the Great Dane Lovers Association of Western Australia, and although she was already 3 when the couple got her, they really committed to training her well. And one of the reasons for this is because this couple really enjoyed to go away camping together, and if they wanted to take Ella with her, they wanted to trust that they had a dog who was obedient. Especially when you're out in the sticks, you really want to know that your dog isn't just gonna disappear or not listen when you want them to. That same year, Ray actually started a new job with a company called Fortescue Metal Group, which is a mining company that mainly mines iron ore. The site he worked at for that company was called the Cloudbreak Mine Site, and he worked as a plant operator and supervisor, so he must have been pretty good at his job. And 3 years later, in 2012, Jennie actually started working for this company also. She was in a slight slightly different section of the company, working as a dump truck operator, but the two of them did work together a lot as well. And they had a few friends at their work as well. One man in particular that they were friends with was a man by the name of Graham Milne. He again worked in a different section of the company. He was an emergency services officer, and they had met because Jennie actually at times suffered from chest pains. From what I could tell, these chest pains weren't life-threatening or anything like that, but obviously they were still there and she wanted them treated, and so she would go and see Graham to get them treated. And I guess that Ray would come along to these appointments at times too, which is kind of how the trio sort of started chatting and realized they had things in common and the friendship formed. Although the couple did enjoy their work, they both decided in early 2015 that they wanted to actually cut back on their hours to focus a little bit more on their farm and just putting time and effort into their farm, because this is what really made them happy, and they knew that they could survive off one income, and so the change just made sense. And another perk of the fact that they were working less is that they could focus on going on prospecting trips. And for those of you that don't know what prospecting is, because I definitely didn't before I started doing research for this video, it's basically just the act of going out and searching for valuable natural resources, which in the case of this trio was mainly gold. Graham, the couple's friend, knew a little bit about prospecting because he'd gone quite a few times previously, and because of this he sort of acted like a bit of a guide. He taught Ray and Jennie everything he knew about prospecting, and the three of them together would practice. They were actually all planning on abseiling down old mine shafts to try and find gold, which isn't that common, and I'm sure you guys can understand why. Old mine shafts can be very dangerous. And I suppose as well as that, a lot of people probably assume that old mine shafts that are abandoned won't have that much gold in them anyway because they're not used anymore, but this couple seemed to think differently, and so that was their main focus. Graham, Ray and Jennie all planned that the three of them would go out and prospect near the tiny town of Sandstone in Western Australia, as there was a lot of abandoned mine shafts out there that they could search for gold in. And I wanted to point out here that it's actually quite common in the prospecting world for people, when they go on trips, to not tell others exactly where they're going. And the reason for this is basically just, if you're gonna strike big and find a massive piece of gold, you don't really want other people to know exactly where you're mining, because you want to keep that gold to yourself. So on the 18th of March 2015, Ray and Jennie contacted their families to let them know that they were going on this trip out to Sandstone. Because Sandstone is so remote, there's actually not even phone service out there, so they told their families that if they didn't hear from them for 10 days that they weren't to worry, because they were just out on this holiday / prospecting trip. The following morning on the 19th of March is when Ray and Jennie and their Great Dane Ella all packed up and set off on the 8-hour drive to near Sandstone. I believe more accurately where they were going is a little place called Bellchambers, which is approximately 30 kilometers south of Sandstone. From my understanding, nobody actually lives in Bellchambers, and people do live in Sandstone, so I guess that's why people sort of refer to the area as Sandstone, because that's just where people live and where the pub is also, you know, priorities. Ray and Jennie actually took 2 cars because they both had trailers on the back. Jennie's trailer had a quad bike, and I'm not sure about Ray's. Maybe he just had prospecting gear in his. But the two of them met up with Graham Milne in a town called Woburn, where they had breakfast together, and then the three of them separately drove their vehicles all the way to the Sandstone area together. What we know about what happened next and in the following days is from Graham's perspective only, and I'm not saying that because I think he's guilty or anything like that, but I just want us all to be on the same page as to where this information is coming from. According to Graham, the 3 prospectors as well as Ella, the Great Dane, arrived at their prospecting campsite on the 19th of March in the afternoon. They'd set up camp and hoped to get straight into prospecting, but unfortunately Ella was easily distracted by the wildlife in the area, and because of this it meant that she actually ran off. She actually ran off a few times that afternoon, but interestingly Graham noted that each time they managed to find her and get her back to the camp, they wouldn't tie her up. they just let her run around. But that afternoon, after Ella had ran off a few times but was back at the camp, Graham and Ray set off on their quad bikes to have a look around the area and sort of just see what was around the area. Graham had also brought a quad bike with him, so the two of them had their own quad bikes, but Jennie had decided to stay back at the camp. While the two of them were out on their bikes riding around, Graham said that they actually heard some gunshots. And so, of course, they rode up to a higher area to see who was there. They could see two men with a vehicle around 500 meters away from where they were, and Ray actually set off two firing shots, not in any sort of malicious way, but basically just to say like, hey, we're here as well, and like, be careful where you shoot, because obviously they probably didn't want to get shot. It was basically just him doing it as a safety precaution. And nothing else came of that event. The men obviously must have just seen them firing those shots and carried on their own way, and then the two men, Ray and Graham, set off back to their camp for dinner. That evening, Ray, Jennie and Graham talked about their plans for the next day before they went to bed. On the morning of Friday the 20th of March, Ray and Graham set out on their quad bikes again. This time they were looking for a specific area that they had pre-planned for prospecting. Graham said though that they weren't able to access the area. I'm not sure why, but that's what he said. And he said that there was also a bit of rain, so they decided to just go back to their campsite for some lunch. After this, Jennie actually spent some time metal detecting in the rivers really close by to the camp. She'd taken Ella with her to do this metal detecting in the rivers, and once she was back with Ella, apparently Ella ran off again. So Graham and Ray then spent a little bit more time looking for her. That afternoon, Jennie again stayed at the camp with Ella while Ray and Graham got on their quad bikes. They again didn't do any prospecting, but once they returned, it was time for dinner, and so the three of them had dinner and went to bed. On the morning of March 21st, after breakfast, Ella again ran away from the camp, chasing wildlife, and by this point, Graham was really frustrated. He felt like he was just wasting his potential prospecting time chasing Ella around, and because of this, he told Ray and Jennie that he was going to go out prospecting by himself, and that he did. He was planning on leaving the following day early in the morning on March 22nd anyway, and he had lent Jennie his quad bike to chase after Ella. So he just asked Jennie that once they got back with Ella, Jennie put his quad bike back on his car so that when he left the following morning, early in the morning, he wouldn't wake them up when he was leaving. And according to Graham, this was the last time he ever saw this couple. Graham said he then packed himself some food and water and went prospecting by himself for about 20 hours. Only returning to camp on March 22nd at around 4 a.m. When he got back to camp, he assumed that Ray and Jennie were asleep as his quad bike was tied up on his trailer and Ella was also there, still untied but asleep. Because Graham had to go back to work on the 24th and his trip back to Perth would take him about 9 hours, he decided that he wanted to get going as soon as possible. And so at 4 a.m. he packed up the rest of his belongings and set off on his trip back to Perth. I think it's important to note here though that he would have been awake for 24 hours, so I can only imagine how tired he would have been. He also didn't say goodbye to Jennie and Ray, as understandably he said that he felt like it would be a bit rude to wake them up at that time when he was leaving. Graham actually didn't message the couple at all after the end of this trip, and I suppose there's probably a few potential reasons as to why. The first is that there was no service in the area anyway, so they wouldn't have gotten a message until they had service again. And maybe the other potential reason was because he was annoyed about Ella the dog. Maybe he just felt like he didn't want to talk to them until he saw them at work again. I do feel like I would send my friends a message after a camping trip just to say like thank you for a good time or something like that, but again, I'm not Graham, so I don't know what his thought process was with that one, but I suppose everyone's different and some people just aren't like that. Sometime around mid-morning of March 22nd, 2015, two friends, Greg, Ella, and Fred Roberts, actually came across the camp of Ray and Jennie. Greg said that him and Fred stopped their cars at the camp, although they didn't get out. They just sort of stopped, I suppose, because it's such a remote area and it's probably kind of interesting to see someone else camping. He said that Ella was out the front, not tied up, and she actually started barking at them when they stopped their cars to have a look at the camp. She didn't run towards them or anything like that. She was just barking, and they noted that no one came out to shush her or anything like that, and so they just assumed that the people who owned the camp must have been nearby but just not there. Neither of the men recalls seeing a red quad bike, which is the color of the quad bike that Jennie was towing on her car, although Fred did say he may have seen a green or grey quad bike there, but they were in their cars and about 50 meters from the camp, so he said he couldn't be sure. If this is true though, I don't have any idea of whose quad bike it could have been. Graham's quad bike was dark blue, but Graham had already left by then, so yeah, not sure whose quad bike that was or if it even was there. On the 27th of March, so quite a few days later, another group of prospectors actually came across Ray and Jennie's camp. Two men called Robert Blair and Trevor Richards were there with their partners and some friends. The group recalls driving past the camp and seeing Ella there sitting on a doona. Ella just sat up and watched them drive past. She didn't bark and she wasn't tied up or anything. The group didn't see any people at the camp, and so they just continued driving. When they were about 400 meters north of the campsite, they actually noticed that there was a red quad bike. This quad bike was parked on the side of a hill and it was sort of half in some bush, and so they just assumed that it was broken down or something like that because again there weren't any people around. They all carried on driving a little further before they set up a camp of their own. The following day was March 28th, and a lady by the name of Caroline Cramp, which I don't know why, but I kind of find that last name funny. But anyways, she was the manager of Sandstone Caravan Park, which was a caravan park quite a few kilometers away from where Ray and Jennie were camped. And on this particular day, she noticed that there was a Great Dane walking around the camp by itself. She noticed that this dog looked like it hadn't been fed for a few days, and so she went up to it and offered it some water, and it drank the whole lot. This dog was identified as Ella through her microchip, and she stayed with Caroline until 3 days later when Jennie's family came to pick Ella up. This same day, which was the 31st, was when Jennie and Ray's families contacted the police because they knew that something must be really wrong if Ella was walking around by herself without Ray and Jennie, because they never would have let that dog walk around alone. I'm assuming the reason there's 3 days in between when Ella was first found and when the family came to pick her up is probably because when the microchip was scanned, it would have had the numbers of Ray and Jennie connected to it, and I suppose they would have contacted them first, and when after 3 days they weren't picking up, they would have tried to find extended family to let them know that there was a dog missing. Carol said that while she was looking after Ella, Ella seemed like a very domesticated dog who loved human connection and made no attempts to run away. She was just happy where she was. Because of the concerns of the Kehlet families, council workers from the Shire of Sandstone went out to look at Ray and Jennie's campsite on that same day, on the 31st. And straight away they could tell that the camp seemed abandoned. Things were set up as if the couple had just momentarily left the camp but intended to return. Some examples of this included the fact that there was meat out on the table that looked like it had been put out to be thawed, but by this point it was just completely off. There were also coffee cups out. There were two. One had a little bit of water in it and the other one had like the remnants of coffee in it. And there was also a wasp's nest forming on Ray's car, which indicated that the couple hadn't been there for a few days. And because of this, police rang around to the family of friends of Ray and Jennie, and they worked out that no one had seen them since the 18th besides Graham, and because of this, police treated this as a missing persons case. Now, I've already talked about Graham's version of events up until he left the camp, but I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about what happened on his drive home. As we already know, he said he left the camp on the 22nd at around 4 a.m. Graham had been awake for about 24 hours at this point, but he said he really wanted to get home and have a day of rest before he started work on the 24th, and so that that's why he was so keen to get home. Graham first told police that he took a route through Mount Magnet to get home, and this road is a paved, sealed road, and it's 65 kilometers longer than an unsealed road that he could have taken home, which is called the Paynes Find Sandstone Road. And Graham said the reason for this is because a few days prior to the trip he'd had some mechanical problems on his car, which he had, and so he was just a bit concerned to take this unsealed, quieter road in case anything with his car went wrong. The interesting thing was though, when police checked his GPS tracker in his car, it actually put him on the unpaved Paynes Find Sandstone Road. And so police questioned him about this, and this is when Graham remembered that he actually had taken that road. He said that when he got to a point where the paved road and unpaved road crossed paths, he decided that he wanted to turn around and go back to camp to do some more prospecting, but only after driving on that road for a little while, he then decided that he actually didn't want to go back to camp. He didn't want to do any more prospecting, so he turned around again and continued his drive home. Graham seems like a very indecisive man. Something else police found out later on is that on that paved road that Graham said that he took home, there's actually one petrol station with a CCTV camera. So police wanted to check this footage just to get their timeline right to work out exactly when Graham drove past, but his car didn't turn up on the CCTV footage. This can be explained though, as there is actually a shortcut behind this petrol station that sometimes people take because it means that they can avoid a stop sign. This is the middle of the Outback and there's not a lot of traffic at all, but I suppose some people don't like stop signs, and so it's plausible that that's what happened here. That same GPS in Graham's car signalled that he was back at his home at Perth at around 8 p.m. on the night of the 22nd. This would have meant that he was awake at this point for around 38 hours. But again, I want to make it clear that I'm not accusing or implying Graham did anything. I just think it's important to include his account because he was the last person to see these people alive. In the first week of April 2015, police started looking around Ray and Jennie's camp area, hoping to find any clues that would help them work out what had happened to this couple. Graham was also called back to assist with the search, which he did. Police noted that he was very cooperative, though he didn't mention to police that they had intended on abseiling down into any mine shafts. Graham later said that this was just because he thought police had just been asking him about a specific area that the trio had intended to prospect on foot, and so he didn't offer up the abseiling information. Police did say though that he seemed genuinely upset when they told him that there wasn't a very high chance that Ray and Jennie would be found alive. But I do just have to say that I feel like it is strange that you wouldn't offer up the abseiling information just as extra information that could help this case. But as well as Graham, there were police, firefighters and council workers all working together to try and find the Kehlets. This search was very extensive with helicopters, infrared aircrafts and horses being used, and there was also a lot of attention on these mine shafts because at the time it was theorized that potentially Ray and Jennie had fallen down one of these while trying to look for their dog Ella. Sadly, at the time though, most of the people working on this case were not properly trained in how to abseil down into these mine shafts, and so this meant a lot of the time the crew would look into these mine shafts from the top, and if they couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, they would then mark the shaft as cleared. But it's important to know that some of these mine shafts are up to 30 meters deep, so realistically I don't know how these search crews felt like they could properly clear these mine shafts if they weren't getting to the bottom of them. And because of this, things were missed. In fact, something very, very important was missed. On April 8th, 2015, an undisclosed media outlet actually got some of the abseilers to demonstrate abseiling down into one of these cleared mined shafts. And they were just doing this to give the media an idea of what the abseiling looked like, because they were abseiling down into some of them, just like I said, not all of them. When this particular abseiler got 9 meters down into the shaft, which is about 2/3 of the full way down, he actually saw something that was very important. He realized he could see a decomposed body at the very bottom. Although this shaft was only 1.8 kilometers north of the Kehlet's campsite, initially it wasn't thought that this body was linked to the missing Kehlets, literally just because of how decomposed the body was. But on April 17th, 2015, it was confirmed that this body was the body of the missing prospector Ray Colette. The mine shaft that Ray was found in was shaped like a wine decanter with a long neck and a bulbous base. The shaft was narrow, but then the base opened up wide and high, and Ray was found lying on his back. His feet were shoulder width apart, his head was facing towards the opening of the shaft, and his body was deeper within the cave. When his body was exhumed, Ray was found to be wearing work boots, blue work trousers, but no shirt. He had a pair of gloves in his pocket, and although he was found at the bottom of this mine shaft, there was no abseiling equipment with him. Although it is absolutely heartbreaking that Ray was not found alive, it did give the search team a bit of hope that they would find Jennie not too long afterwards. The search continued, but soon days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and there was no sign of Jennie anywhere. At this time, there had been no arrests made either, as there wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone, and understandably, this was heartbreaking to the families of Ray and Jennie Kehlet, as they just wanted answers. For 5 years, there was very little movement on this case, but this actually changed in early 2020 when there was a coronial investigation into the death of Ray Colette and the missing person Jennie Kehlet. I'm going to talk a bit more about part 2 of this investigation in a video which I will upload tomorrow, but for now, just remember that I've linked Crime Stoppers below, as well as the email of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. If you guys want to send them an email letting them know that you want to see more movement on this case, then please do. You would be surprised how much influence us as the public can have, so if you have 5 minutes to spare, please take the time to just send them an email. But with that, we come to the end of part 1 of this video, and I will hopefully see you in part 2 tomorrow. Bye, you guys.